One photo, one secret, one killer. Welcome to Mystery Magnifier. I am your host, Phantom. Drop your country in the comments. Your voice matters here, into the mystery. It was in the first days of September that I found myself once more in London, with no more pressing occupation than the agreeable business of being idle. The summer had been spent in the country with a cousin of mine, an arrangement which, though wholesome in theory, had in practice produced a surfeit of tennis, dull rectitude, and elderly debates upon the weather. I returned to town with a hungry relish for civilization, imagining dinners, theaters, and those small, unexpected adventures which seem to lurk in paved streets far more obligingly than they ever do in lanes bordered by hawthorn. I had not been back many hours before I made my way to Whitehaven Mansions. There are men who can travel the empire and yet feel no sense of arrival until they have turned their latch with their own key. I suppose I am of that sort. My flat, neat and faintly impersonal as a well-run hotel, welcomed me with the familiar scent of polish and stale tobacco. I rang for the maid, gave a few instructions, and, finding myself restless, did what I generally do in moments of vague dissatisfaction. I went to see Hercule Poirot. Poirot, as ever, was installed in his little sitting room like a small, fastidious monarch in exile. Everything about those rooms reflected his mind, order, symmetry, and a deliberate elegance that never strayed into ostentation. The armchairs sat at precise angles. The silver on the tray was arranged as though for a photograph. Even the flowers, white asters that day, stood in a vase at the exact center of the round table, so that the circle of petals seemed to complete the geometry of the place. He greeted me with that charming, almost ceremonious warmth of his. "Ah, mon ami Hastings, you return to me at last. London has not eaten you then. The country air, it does not make you too heroic and too brown." I laughed and held out my hand. "No heroics, Poirot. I'm as dull and as pale as ever. And you, what have you been doing? Tell me there is a case. Tell me you have not been driven to polishing your mustaches for lack of crime." He lifted a finger, mildly reproachful. "You make the little joke, but you are in time, yes. There is, how do you say it, a curious affair. Not yet a crime, perhaps, but already it has the odor of one. Sit you down. You shall drink the tisane with me, and you shall listen." On the table lay a letter of creamy paper, thick and expensive. The handwriting upon it was thin, slanted, and impatient, the kind of script that indicates more pride in speed than in legibility. Poirot tapped it with satisfaction. "You see, my friend, I have for once been solicited not by the police, but by society. It is flattering, n'est-ce pas? One is invited because one is celebrated. One has a reputation for the discreet understanding of so-called delicate matters." "Who writes?" I asked, reaching for the envelope. Poirot snatched it away with comic indignation. No, you shall not devour the facts like a good dog that eats before he smells. I will read. Observe, it is a lady, Lady Beatrice Easton." The name stirred in my memory. Easton, I connected it with a certain princely townhouse in Belgravia, a philanthropic committee or two, and a great deal of money directed by a firm will. Poirot read aloud, "Monsieur Poirot, you are, I believe, the only person in London who can be trusted to handle an awkward matter with intelligence and discretion. I must beg you to come to Easton Lodge on Thursday next at 4 o'clock. You will be met at the station. I cannot state my reasons on paper. I will only say that there has been a disturbance in my household of a kind that cannot be tolerated. It concerns a photograph. I entreat you, do not refuse me. Beatrice Easton." Poirot laid the letter down and looked at me over the rim of his cup. "A photograph," I said slowly. "That seems a very thin thing to call you in for." "Ah," said Poirot, his eyes brightening. "Already you make the little judgment. That is why I read to you, Hastings. You are fresh. You have not met the photograph. You do not yet know its weight. A photograph can be a trifle, yes, or it can be a dagger. It depends what it captures, what it freezes, what it threatens to show. His manner had grown suddenly intent. I have often observed this in Poirot. The way in which a small phrase, a turn of thought, will light some inner lamp. He leaned back, hands together, his voice taking on that reflective cadence which always presaged a lecture to my slower intelligence. There are two kinds of evidence, my friend. The evidence of the eye and the evidence of the soul. Your police, they love the first kind. They measure footprints, they weigh cigars, they sniff powders. But a photograph, it is often of the second kind. It shows not only where a person stood, but how they wished to stand. It betrays the secret attitude, the little vanity, the fear, the hunger. You think there is blackmail? I suggested. Perhaps. Or perhaps there is only the beginning of a fear that will grow. That is why the lady writes. She feels the thread tightening, though she does not see the hands that pull it. The Thursday he spoke of was nearly upon us. I felt in that moment the old boyish eagerness rise in me. The delight of being once more at the side of my extraordinary friend, of stepping into some enclosed world where every glance and word might mean more than it seemed. Of course I'll come with you, I said. Poirot's face softened. Mais oui, I hoped you would say so. You have been away too long. Also, if I may confess it, I do not wish to face alone the English country house. It makes me nervous. There is always too much tweed, too much dog, too little exactitude. We Juarez laughed, and for a little while our talk drifted on to safer subjects. But beneath it, I felt a faint stirring of unease. The letter was brief, but in its brevity there had been urgency. A disturbance which cannot be tolerated. A household shaken, all because of a photograph. I noticed then something I had not at first remarked. Upon the mantelpiece stood a framed photograph, rather larger than the ordinary cabinet kind. It was freshly placed there, too. The dust around it had been disturbed in a neat oval. "Is that the photograph?" I asked, nodding towards it. Poirot turned his head. For an instant he was wholly still, like a cat that has heard a whisper behind a wall. "No, Hastings," he said quietly. "That one is mine, but perhaps it is a cousin to hers." He rose and brought it to me. The frame was plain black, the sort you buy in any decent shop. What made it striking was the subject. It showed a group of people gathered on the terrace of a country house. There were 12 figures, perhaps 13, some seated, some standing with a deliberate informality meant to suggest intimacy. The house behind them was handsome in that sober Old English way. Stone balustrades, tall windows, a sweep of lawn falling away into trees. But it was the faces that held you. The sun had been behind the photographer, so the light fell fully upon the group. Every feature was sharp. Every expression had been caught in that arrested instant when people are neither wholly natural nor wholly posed. "There is something odd about it," I murmured. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Bien. Tell me what you see." I took a breath and considered. A family party, or friends. The man in the center, grey mustache, stiff collar. He's the host, a baronet type. There are young women, one with a rather defiant chin, a clergyman, a soldier on leave perhaps, and, well, I can't tell why, but they don't look comfortable. Even the one smiling, it's like a game in which someone has made a very bad move. Poirot nodded, pleased. "Good, you observe the atmosphere, not the details only. It is from a charity fete 3 years ago. The Eastons were among those present. The lady in white, with the pearls. See there on the right. That is Lady Beatrice herself. Then why?" Poirot set the photograph back on the mantelpiece with care. "Because, Hastings, a photograph is never only what it shows, it is also what it hides, and if Lady Beatrice writes to me in fear of a photograph, it is because in it she sees something that no one else has yet seen. Or else she's afraid that someone else has seen it first." He glanced at the clock. is late. We shall go on Thursday to Easton Lodge. Then we shall learn what there is to learn. For the moment, I prefer to keep my little grey cells in reserve. But I tell you this, mon ami, when a household trembles because of a picture, it is not a trifle to be laughed away. It is the shadow before the ease. Thunder. There was a pause. The room, so orderly, so serenely domestic, had acquired a different aspect. The photograph on the mantel appeared to watch us. The faces upon it seemed less like fragments of a pleasant past and more like actors halted in a tableau, waiting for the curtain to rise. I rose, suddenly impatient for Thursday. "Well," I said, forcing a briskness I did not feel, "I suppose there's nothing to do until then but pack a bag and prepare for your horror of tweed." Poirot smiled. "Exactly. You will bring also the boots for the mud, yes? But no, Hastings. No heroics. Leave those to the young men in the photographs. You will see, perhaps, how heroic they are." His tone was light, but underneath it I caught the faint, inexplicable chill I had felt when first I entered the room. A photograph. A fear. A closed circle about to close tighter still. And somewhere, as yet invisible to us, a killer hiding in plain sight. We took the train from Paddington on Thursday after luncheon, and I observed that Poirot had armed himself not only with a small valise of immaculate leather, but also with a kind of moral determination that expressed itself in the set of his shoulders and the extraordinary perfection of his tie. There are cases when the most trivial preliminary detail assumes importance later. I record, therefore, that on the journey he spoke scarcely at all. He sat once or twice with his eyes closed, the tips of his fingers pressed together, and though his face was composed, the little muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched now and then in the way that told me his mind was at work. At Henley St. Mark's, a neat little station smelling of damp wood and late roses, we were met by a car bearing the Eastern crest. Our driver was a young man with the impassive good looks of a footman promoted to more perilous duties. He touched his cap, took our luggage, and drove us out into country lanes where the hedges were already taking on the first copper hints of autumn. Easton Lodge revealed itself after a turn in the avenue, a long, dignified house of honey-colored stone with a terrace like that in Poirot's photograph, and a broad sweep of lawn falling to a lake where swans sat like white commas on green water. It was the sort of place one expects to find in old family histories, a home that had never doubted its right to be there. Lady Beatrice Easton met us in the hall. She was a tall woman in her middle 50s, very straight, with dark hair pinned in a smooth knot, and a face that might, in youth, have been gently pretty, but was now hardened by something tougher than age. Perhaps responsibility, perhaps pride. Her eyes were grey and singularly direct. She came forward with outstretched hand. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. I'm grateful you came so quickly." Poirot bowed over her hand with his usual air of courtly appreciation. "Madame, to be of service to you is a pleasure. You have been troubled. It is seen." Her mouth tightened. "Yes. Come at once to the morning room. I dislike speaking of such matters in the hall." She led us through a series of fine rooms, quiet, shaded, full of old portraits and the restrained opulence of inherited taste. There was a certain stiffness in the house that I felt at once. Not the stiffness of poverty or neglect, but the stiffness of too much rule. Even the rugs seemed to lie flatter than rugs ought to. The morning room was cool and bright, with French windows opening to a small rose garden. Tea had been set out, though I noticed Lady Beatrice did not touch a cup. Instead, she stood by the mantelpiece, her hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles were white. "I must ask you to forgive me," she said abruptly. "I hate melodrama, Monsieur Poirot. If I had not felt there was no other recourse, I would not have written." Poirot inclined his head. "Melodrama is sometimes only the word for truth when it is inconvenient. You will tell me, madame, what concerns the photograph." She looked at him a moment, as if measuring just how much she dared place in his hands. Then she went to a small writing table, took from a drawer a photograph in a thick cream mount, and carried it to Poirot. "This is the thing that has disturbed my household." Poirot accepted it delicately, as though it were brittle, and studied it in silence. I leaned forward. It was a group photograph, taken, I should say, not more than a week or two before. The setting was the terrace of Easton Lodge. The composition was much the same as that of the older photograph in Poirot's rooms. A dozen people arranged in a conscious informality, but the mood was different. In the older one, there had been an air of enforced gaiety. Here there was something sharper, like the edge of a knife under cloth. Many faces were unfamiliar to me, but I picked out Lady Beatrice herself, seated near the center, rigid as a queen in exile. Beside her stood a heavy-set man with a florid complexion and a sandy moustache, his expression amiable in the way of men who expect to be obeyed. A younger man lounged on the balustrade to the left, handsome and dark, his smile a trifle too amused. Two girls in pale dresses sat together on a bench, one fair and wistful, the other with the defiant chin I had noticed before. Behind them, a spare clergyman looked as if he would rather be elsewhere. There were, in all, 12 persons. And yet, as I stared, a sense of disquiet grew. I could not have said at first why. Nothing in the photograph was, on the face of it, remarkable. It might have been any family snapshot taken at the end of a good luncheon. The sunlight was clear, the lines were sharp, and precisely because of that sharpness, small things began to press themselves on my notice. The fair girl's right hand was hidden in the folds of her skirt. The clergyman's eyes were not on the camera, but to the side, fixed upon something out of frame. The florid man's left shoulder was slightly raised, as if in a half shrug or a protective gesture. The amused young man's smile did not reach his eyes, and on the extreme right, half in shadow by the French window, stood a woman in black whose face was turned a fraction away at the instant of exposure. One saw the line of her cheek, the sweep of her hair, but not the full expression. Poirot did not look up at once. He continued to regard the photograph with an intensity that made me feel, absurdly, that he expected it to speak. At last he said softly, "And this photograph? Who took it?" "My niece Celia," Lady Beatrice replied. "She has a little Kodak. She is forever snapping at people. This was taken on Saturday after luncheon. In fact," she checked herself, and her voice altered. "It was after the luncheon for Sir Leopold Charters." Poirot's head lifted. "Sir Leopold Charters is here." "He was," said Lady Beatrice. There was a slight emphasis on the past tense that struck me. Poirot said nothing for a beat. "You will continue, madame." She drew a breath, and for the first time I saw that her composure was kept by force, not by calm. On Monday morning, Sir Leopold was found dead in the library. A little jolt went through me. Poirot did not move. Only his eyes, very bright, became quite still. "Dead?" I said. "How?" Lady Beatrice held up a hand. "There is no doubt. Dr. Nairn certified it. The police have been here." The last word was spoken with a distaste that told me what she thought of police intrusion. "They speak of his heart, but I am not a fool. Sir Leopold dined with us on Sunday night. He was in excellent spirits. He played bridge, he argued with Arthur about the budget, and he went to bed laughing. Men do not die laughing and call it a heart 2 hours later without a reason." Poirot was very gentle. "You believe he was murdered?" "I do." "Why?" She pointed to the photograph in Poirot's hands. "Because of that." I frowned. "But it's only a group—" "No," she said sharply, and then with an effort lowered her voice. "Look carefully. There are 12 people there. There were 13 on the terrace when Celia took it." I stared again, counting. 12, certainly. "Who is missing?" "My secretary," said Lady Beatrice. "Miss Abigail Worthing." Poirot's eyebrows rose the merest fraction. Your secretary is absent from the picture? She is absent from the house, Lady Beatrice returned. No one has seen her since Sunday afternoon. After Sir Leopold's death, I asked for her. She was not to be found. Her room, empty. Her things, gone. Every trace of her, vanished. Yet on Saturday, she stood on that terrace with the rest of us. Celia remembers it. I remember it. We all remember it. And when the photograph was developed yesterday, she was not there. The air in the room seemed to thicken. I felt an unpleasant creeping along my spine. Poirot looked down at the photograph once more, and this time I saw that he was not studying faces at all, but the empty spaces between them. "Madame," he said at last, "you will tell me about Miss Worthing. Who is she? How long has she been with you?" "Nearly 3 years. She is 34, quiet, capable, with excellent references. She came to me from a firm in the city. I trusted her utterly. I would have said she had no enemies here. And yet she disappears after the death of Sir Leopold. Yes, and I cannot rid myself of the conviction that the photograph is the key. If she is guilty, why is she not there? If she is innocent, why has someone contrived to erase her? It is unnatural." Her voice trembled at the last word, in spite of herself. "Monsieur Poirot, I ask you to find the truth, for my household's sake, and for my own." Poirot put the photograph carefully back into its envelope. "The truth, madame," he said quietly, "is what I find. But first I must see where the truth last stood. You will take me to the library, and afterwards you will present to me all who were on that terrace when the picture was taken. We shall begin, if you please, at the beginning." Lady Beatrice bowed her head once, like a general accepting an order she had prayed for. And with that we rose to go, while in my mind the sunlit terrace of the photograph turned suddenly dark, and the missing figure, unseen yet insistently present, seemed to move like a ghost just beyond the frame. Lady Beatrice led the way along a corridor paneled in oak so dark with age that it seemed to drink the light. The house was very still. If a country house has a voice, Easton Lodge's was a whisper trained by long habit never to rise. Even our footsteps on the runner were subdued, and once or twice I caught the faint murmur of servants somewhere out of sight, speaking low as though a patient lay sleeping. We came to a pair of double doors. Lady Beatrice paused, set her hand upon the brass handle, and looked at Poirot. "I have not been inside since Monday. The police, they did what they chose. I could not bear to watch." Poirot bowed. "It is understood. But now you will be brave, madame." She opened the doors. The library was a fine, somber room with tall windows facing the lake. Books climbed the walls in orderly ranks. A deep leather chair stood by the fireplace, and in the center, a large table was laid with the detritus of a man who reads as he lives, methodically and without apology. There were papers in tidy piles, a pair of spectacles, a half-empty decanter of port, and a green-shaded lamp whose cord trailed to the socket like a thin black snake. Poirot went directly to the hearth and stood there, looking down. On the pale rug before the fire, there was still a dark stain, roughly the size of an open hand, which no scrubbing had fully removed. I felt my throat tighten. "That is where he fell," Lady Beatrice said in a low voice. "Arthur found him. He had come down early to read in the library, as he always does. Sir Leopold was on the floor. The poker lay there, like that. Dr. Nairn says he was dead then already." Poirot's gaze moved with the minuteness of a man inspecting a miniature painting. He noted the poker, which now rested against the fender, and the faint scuff marks on the rug beside it. He crossed to the writing table by the window, opened a drawer, then closed it again with a little dissatisfied click. He stooped, running his fingers along the edge of the rug, and finally set himself in the leather chair, facing the fire, his head a trifle on one side. "I should like," he said gently, "for you to tell me exactly what happened on Monday morning. With the utmost precision, please." Lady Beatrice's hands tightened over each other. Arthur woke at 7:30. He came down at 8, as is his custom. He says he heard nothing in the house. When he reached the library, Sir Leopold was lying on his left side, head towards the hearth. There was blood. He telephoned for Dr. Nairn and for the police. He sent a servant to me. I came down at once. Dr. Nairn arrived within 20 minutes. He examined Sir Leopold and said that death had been sudden, probably due to heart failure. The police, Inspector Croft from Henley, were less certain. They insisted on looking for signs. Her lip curled. And did they find any? Poirot asked. Nothing. A broken whiskey glass near the chair. Perhaps he had risen. Perhaps he staggered. They decided he had struck his head on the fender as he fell. It is their way to make the simplest story. Poirot nodded without committing himself. Who was in the house that night? The family, she replied. My brother-in-law, Arthur Easton, his 2 daughters, Celia and Rosamond. My cousin, Mrs. Gerda Vane, Commander Lionel Stokes, a friend of Arthur's, Reverend Stephen Rudd, and Miss Vera Langford, who has been visiting Celia. Sir Leopold was our guest. Miss Worthing, as always, was in her room after dinner, for she does not sit late. Your household is not large, Poirot observed. It is enough. There was pride in her voice, and some fatigue too. Poirot rose, went to the table, and lightly touched the green lamp. On Sunday evening, Sir Leopold was, how shall I say? Well, perfectly. He ate heartily. He argued. He drank a single glass of port. He went up at 10:30, quite steady. And in the morning he comes down early. You say he had the habit? Yes, he was an early riser. He liked to read here before breakfast. Poirot's fingers drifted to the spectacles on the table. He lifted them, peered through them at nothing, and set them down again. These are his? Yes. Then he was reading when he died. Poirot's voice was mild, but I have learned to heed even the mildness of that man. Did Inspector Croft say when he believed death occurred? The doctor estimated between 6:30 and 7, before Arthur was awake. Arthur is not an eavesdropper, she returned stiffly. Poirot turned toward the windows. And the door? There are 2 entrances. One from the hall, through which we came, and one here, to the terrace. That door was locked in the morning. Arthur says he found it locked. Poirot went to the terrace door. It was French windowed and bolted at top and bottom. He unfastened it, opened it, stepped out for a moment onto the stone flags, and returned. There is no sign of forcing, he murmured. No, the police said so too. Poirot stood a moment looking out, not at the lake, but down at the low rose garden directly beneath the windows. Then he asked lightly, You have removed nothing from this room since Monday? Nothing. Not even these papers? They were as he left them, she said. I asked that they remain. It seemed respectful. Poirot nodded approval. He bent over the piles, rearranged nothing but read titles with his eyes. I saw his attention quicken to one folder, a thick blue thing tied with tape. He did not touch it, merely took in the label. Charters Estate. Private. Lady Beatrice followed his look. Yes, Sir Leopold was my solicitor. He was here to advise upon certain family matters. Poirot turned his head slowly. Family matters are often combustible, madame. Your letter said you could not write more. Now perhaps you will tell me what those matters were. Her face closed. In time, Monsieur Poirot. At present, I should prefer not to. Poirot accepted that with a little bow. As you wish. I do not press. But understand me, sometimes the presses are made by fate whether we like it or not. She did not answer. There was a silence in which the ticking of a small clock on the mantel became suddenly loud. Poirot broke it by asking, You say Miss Worthing vanished. On Sunday afternoon, when last did anyone see her? Lady Beatrice hesitated. At luncheon, certainly. After that, she looked uncertainly at me, then back at Poirot. Celia says she saw her in the corridor about 4. Arthur believes he spoke to her in the study at 5. I myself saw her after tea, perhaps 5:30, carrying some letters. That is all. And her room? Poirot asked. It is on the 2nd floor near mine. When we found her missing, I went at once. The bed had been slept in Sunday night. Her wardrobe was empty, her travel case gone, even her little toiletry bag gone. She left intentionally. Leaving no note? None. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And amongst her things were their photographs. Lady Beatrice gave a start, and I saw the color rise into her cheeks as though she resented the direction of his thought. I do not know, she said quickly. I did not rummage. Poirot did not comment. Instead, he said pleasantly, Very well, we will not trespass there until it is necessary. Now, madam, you will be so kind as to let Captain Hastings and myself see the photograph once more. She took it from her pocketbook at once, as though relieved to have something concrete to offer. Poirot laid it on the table, smoothing the corners. You are sure there were 13 on the terrace? Absolutely. And Miss Worthing stood where? Behind me and Arthur, a little to the right. She was half hidden, but she was there. Celia remembers because Miss Worthing laughed about being behind the tallest people. Poirot's gaze moved to the right-hand cluster in the photograph. The grouping there was tighter, Lady Beatrice seated, Arthur Easton behind her left shoulder, the florid man, Sir Leopold, I assumed, standing to Arthur's right, and further right, the shadowed woman by the window. There was a slight wedge of space between Sir Leopold and the woman, just enough for another figure to have stood. Yet it was not the absence of a body that caught me now, but a tidy compositional oddity. Sir Leopold's right hand hung down, fingers loosely curled, and in the crook of those fingers was a tiny gleam. So slight I would have missed it had Poirot not leaned closer and tilted the photograph to the light. A ring, I said involuntarily. Poirot did not look at me. Perhaps, or perhaps something else. But it is not there by accident. Lady Beatrice's eyes fixed on the spot. I never noticed that. Few people notice what is too small for the emotions to seize, Poirot murmured. Now, madame, you will do one more thing for me. Not later. Now. You will ask all those present on Saturday to assemble in the drawing room at 5 o'clock. Tell them it is my wish. I will speak with them one by one. Her gaze flickered. All of them? All, said Poirot softly. For we are in a closed circle. Sir Leopold is dead. Miss Worthing is gone. A photograph has been altered by hands we do not yet know. In such a circle, madame, we do not choose whom to suspect. We let the circle choose for us. For the first time, I saw fear move openly across her face. Not fear of scandal, but of what that closed circle might contain. She bowed without a word and left us. When the door had shut behind her, I turned to Poirot. Do you think the death was not natural? Poirot was looking down at the stain by the hearth. I think, Hastings, that when a lady of iron trembles before a photograph, there is always blood behind the glass. But whether the blood came before or after the trick, that is what we shall discover. Come, we will stand where the dead man stood. He moved to the fireplace, and I followed, feeling suddenly that the air in the library had grown colder, though the afternoon sun still poured through the windows. Somewhere upstairs, a clock chimed the half-hour, and in its measured notes I seemed to hear the beginning of a countdown. Quiet, inexorable, and already far. Along. At 5 o'clock precisely, we were shown into the drawing room, and I could not help thinking that Lady Beatrice's household had obeyed her summons with a punctuality born less of affection than of discipline. The room itself was long and airy, furnished in pale damask and a great many mirrors which multiplied the late sun into soft, flattering light. It ought to have been cheerful. Yet the people gathered there lent it an atmosphere of constraint, as though an invisible wire had been stretched between each soul and the next. They stood, for the most part, rather than sat. No one seemed inclined to choose a chair first, and so be thought anxious or submissive. I noted, with the old soldier's habit, how quickly a group reveals itself by posture before a word is spoken. Arthur Easton was a man of 60 or thereabouts, spare and neat, with hair already whitening at the temples and eyes that had once been handsome but were now dulled by chronic worry. There was something of the bank manager about him, an air of scrupulous correctness suggesting that he had spent his life keeping account not only of money, but of propriety. He hovered near the fireplace, shifting his weight as though the rug were less steady than it looked. Close to him stood Commander Lionel Stokes, broad-chested and ruddy, his naval mustache waxed to points that might have been meant to make up for the deficiency of hair on his crown. He gave me a brisk nod, the kind of greeting that assumes comradeship on the strength of a shared uniform. His manner was hearty. His eyes were not. Mrs. Gerda Vane, Lady Beatrice's cousin, sat very upright on a sofa, her hands folded in her lap. She was a plump, pleasant-looking woman in her 40s with soft brown hair and the watery, sympathetic gaze of those who collect other people's troubles like knitting. She watched Lady Beatrice with an anxious devotion that made me think she had long played the part of comforter in this house. Then there were the younger women. Celia Easton, who had taken the photograph, was perhaps 22. A slim girl with fair hair cut in that modern fashion women insist does not shorten their necks, though it very often does. She had an air of nervous intelligence, like someone accustomed to managing emotions by thinking quickly. Her sister Rosamond was 2 years younger, darker, and much more openly defiant. She stood with her arms crossed, chin lifted, eyes glittering with indignation that seemed too large for mere grief. The visitor, Miss Vera Langford, was the woman I'd seen in the shadow of the photograph. She was in black now, too, a severe fitted dress that suited her long, narrow figure. She could not have been more than 28, yet there was something oddly ageless about her, perhaps because her face was so controlled that it offered no clear clue to temperament. Her eyes were a pale, unsettling green. She stood slightly apart from the sisters, as though she had been invited into their confidence but had declined the full intimacy. Reverend Stephen Rudd was a spare man with a gentle, lined face and a clerical collar that sat on him like a yoke. His fingers kept worrying at each other, and he was the only one who looked at Poirot with frank relief, as though a cure had walked into the room. Last, and most conspicuous by temperament, if not by height, was Sir Leopold Charters's nephew, Philip Charters. It was he who had lounged in the photograph with that half-amused smile. He was perhaps 30, very handsome, with glossy dark hair and an ease of movement that made one think of tennis courts and good restaurants. He held a cigarette between his fingers, not because he wanted to smoke, but because it gave him something to do with his hands. I saw at once that he was a man who had always been allowed to treat life as a game, until perhaps that week. Poirot took in the group with one slow, comprehensive glance, then bowed to them all, his face composed in that polite neutrality which is more disarming than any smile. Mesdames, Messieurs, I thank you for assembling. I regret the circumstances, but you will understand that I am asked by Lady Beatrice to discover the truth about the death of Sir Leopold Charters and the disappearance of Miss Worthing. To do so, I must ask you questions. You will oblige me. There was a faint stir. Arthur Easton cleared his throat. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Anything in our power. Rosamond gave a short laugh. Power? If ever there was a house where power is a fantasy, it's this one. Rosamond, said Arthur sharply. She shrugged without apology. Poirot regarded her a moment with mild interest, as though she were a new specimen under glass. I will speak with each of you separately, he said. But first, one question before you all. You were together on the terrace on Saturday afternoon. Miss Worthing stood among you. When the photograph was developed, she was not there. How do you explain this? There was an instant of stiff silence. Then Celia spoke quickly. It must be some kind of error. I mean, perhaps the negative was damaged. I don't know how these things work exactly, but photographs can go wrong. Poirot inclined his head. They can. But we are not here to accept at once the convenient explanation. We are here to consider all. Commander Stokes snorted. These modern cameras are toys. My sister once took my picture at Brighton, and the chap next to me came out with 2 heads. If you ask me, it's a simple mishap. Philip Charters flicked ash into the fireplace. A mishap that happens to coincide with my uncle's death and the vanishing of Lady B's secretary. That's neat. His tone was light, but Lady Beatrice's mouth hardened at the familiar Lady B. I fancied she disliked his ease. Reverend Rudd said softly, "It is a dreadful coincidence, Philip, but perhaps coincidence is all it is." Vera Langford remained silent. Her eyes moved from face to face like a metronome measuring the room. Poirot turned slightly to her. "Mademoiselle." She met his gaze without flinching. "I don't know enough about photography to explain it, Monsieur Poirot, but I know what I saw." Miss Worthing was on the terrace. She was standing close to Sir Leopold. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Close to him? You are sure?" "Quite sure." Philip's brows lifted. "Abigail and Uncle Leopold? That's a match I wouldn't have wagered on. She always looked as if she'd swallowed a ruler." Rosamond said with sudden heat, "Don't be coarse. Miss Worthing was kinder to this family than people with our name have ever been to her." Arthur's face reddened. "What nonsense, Rosamond. She was paid." "She was treated like a piece of furniture," the girl shot back, "and she still managed to be decent." Lady Beatrice took a step forward. "Enough." Poirot interposed with a small gesture. No, let her speak. Strong feeling is often the door through which truth comes in." Rosamond's eyes flashed, but she fell silent, biting her lip. Poirot nodded to himself and said gently, "We will not quarrel as friends of Sir Leopold. Let us be practical. You have all said you saw Miss Worthing on the terrace. None of you suggest she was never there. Then we are forced to ask, did the photograph lie? Or did someone make it lie?" Arthur frowned. "You think someone altered it? That's absurd. Who here knows how to do such a thing?" Philip laughed softly. "Half the world knows. You can scratch a negative or bleach a print. It isn't witchcraft." Celia stared at him. "Philip, do you know about that sort of thing?" He lifted his shoulders. "I know enough to say it isn't impossible. I've had friends at Cambridge who could give the college bursar a heart attack with what they could do in a dark room." Poirot's head tipped a fraction. "Ah, Cambridge. There is knowledge there, yes." His voice remained mild, but I could see the line of his thought. "And here in this house, is there a dark room?" Celia nodded at once. "Yes, in the old laundry wing. We set it up last year because I wanted to learn properly." "And who has access?" "Anyone, I suppose. The key is kept in the pantry, but it's not locked. If one of us wanted to use it, or if a servant wanted to use it," Poirot added quietly. Arthur stiffened. "Surely we aren't going to drag servants into this. The police were already impertinent enough." Poirot bowed. "I drag no one, monsieur. I only open doors to see what is behind. Servants are people. They see, they hear, and sometimes they act." Philip ground out his cigarette. If Abigail did it herself, why would she erase herself from a photograph? That's like leaving behind a calling card that says, "I was here, and now I'm not." "Unless," Vera Langford said, and her voice startled me because it was so low and precise. "She didn't erase herself, unless someone erased her to make us think she had." Celia put a hand to her mouth. Mrs. Vane gave a little sob that she tried to smother at once. Poirot looked at Vera with a small approving nod. "You think well, mademoiselle. There is a good brain behind the green eyes." Rosamond turned on Vera abruptly. "Do you mean that someone here wanted to frame Miss Worthing?" Vera's expression did not change. "I mean that if you are asking why a thing seems theatrical, you should consider who enjoys theater." Philip's smile returned, but this time it was brittle. And who in this charming family is the playwright, I wonder? Poirot clapped his hands lightly, as though bringing a rehearsal back to order. Bien. Already there are many little ideas, but ideas without facts are like hats without heads. They look fine on the peg, but they do not walk. So now we take facts. I will begin with Monsieur Arthur Easton. Captain Hastings, you will excuse us. Perhaps you will stroll on the terrace and see for yourself the place where you all stood on Saturday. It is good sometimes to see with the eyes before one thinks with the brain. Arthur looked relieved to be summoned first. Perhaps his conscience liked to face interrogation before anticipation could gnaw at it. He moved with Poirot towards the study, leaving me momentarily alone with the others. The group broke apart in tiny, instinctive shifts. Celia went to the window. Rosamond watched her sister with a blend of protectiveness and resentment. Mrs. Vane whispered something to Reverend Rudd. Philip leaned against the mantel with an air of careless boredom that did not deceive me for a second, and Vera Langford remained where she was, still and observational, like a shadow that had learned to speak. I stepped quietly out through the French windows to the terrace. The stone flags were warm underfoot. The late roses leaned lazily over their trellises. It was a peaceful scene, and yet I felt as though I were walking into the negative of that peace. I went to the exact spot Celia had described, near the right-hand cluster by the windows, and tried to arrange the ghosts in my mind. Lady Beatrice seated, Arthur behind, Sir Leopold at Arthur's side, Vera by the window. Where, then, had Miss Worthing stood? There was indeed a narrow gap between Sir Leopold and the window, just enough for a slender figure. I stepped into it. From here, one would have been half in sun, half in shade. The camera, if Celia had stood where I guessed, would have caught my face in profile unless I turned my head, and if I turned my head at the very instant of exposure. A voice behind me said softly, "You're standing exactly where she did." I swung round. Rosamond had followed me out, noiseless as a cat. Her defiant chin was raised, but her eyes were bright with something more complicated than anger. "You're sure?" I asked. "As sure as I'm standing here now." She came closer, lowering her voice. "Captain Hastings, you know Monsieur Poirot. You've seen him work. Tell me truthfully, if you can. Do you think Miss Worthing killed Sir Leopold?" Her question was raw. It surprised me not because I had not considered it, but because of the way she asked, as though the thought hurt her personally. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But Poirot will find out." Rosamond looked away over the lawn. Abigail wasn't a saint. But she wasn't a murderer, and if people here say she was, it's because it suits them. Who would it suit? She hesitated, then said quickly, "All of them. Anyone who wants Sir Leopold's death to be tidy. Anyone who doesn't want someone looking too closely at what he came here to do." Before I could press her, the terrace door opened again. This time Vera Langford stepped out, closing it carefully behind her. "I wondered if I might borrow you for a moment, Captain Hastings," she said politely. "Monsieur Poirot asked if you would be good enough to walk with me. He wishes me to tell you something I may not say so freely inside." The exactness of her tone made the request sound less like a whim and more like an instruction. Rosamond stiffened. "Poirot didn't ask you to spy." Vera turned her head slightly. "No, he asked me to be useful." There was a pause in which the old rivalry of young women fled without a word. Then Rosamond said abruptly, "Fine, walk. But don't think I'm going away. This concerns my family." Vera gave a small nod that might have been assent or indifference. We moved along the terrace together. The air smelled of box and late summer. Down by the lake a gardener had paused in his work to watch us with furtive curiosity. "Captain Hastings," Vera began, still in that low, even voice. "You've been looking at the photograph. Did you notice Sir Leopold's hand?" I started. The tiny gleam, the curled fingers. Yes, there was something like a ring. Not his, she said. Sir Leopold wore no ring on that hand. I noticed at the time because he was holding something that didn't belong to him. It was small and bright. When Celia called for us to stand, he slipped it into his fingers quickly, as though he didn't want it seen. Rosamund broke in, sharp. What was it? Vera shook her head. I don't know, but I know who handed it to him. Miss Worthing. I felt the words drop like stones into a well. You saw that, I said. I did. Her eyes were steady on mine, giving away nothing. They were speaking quietly near the window before the rest of you arranged yourselves. Miss Worthing took something from her pocket and passed it to Sir Leopold. He looked at it, frowned, then pocketed it. When Celia raised the camera, he still had it in his hand. Rosamund's face had gone white. Why didn't you say this before? Because no one asked, Vera replied. And because I find your aunt's house not always welcoming to strangers with observations. Rosamund flushed, but she did not deny it. I tried to keep my own voice calm. This object, could it be connected to his death? Vera's mouth curved in the slightest hint of a smile that was not humor. It could be connected to many things. Miss Worthing vanished. Sir Leopold died. The photograph was tampered with. In the middle of it sits a small, bright object changing hands in silence. I would say it deserves attention. We had reached the far end of the terrace. Beyond it, the gravel path dipped into a yew-walk, shadowed and cool. Somewhere inside the house, I heard a door close with a soft, decisive sound. Vera stopped. That is all I know. I thought you should know it before you went back in. The others will not speak of it unless Monsieur Poirot forces them. She looked at me a moment longer. There are loyalties here. Most of them are not to the dead. With that, she turned to go back. Rosamund caught her arm. Vera, why are you doing this? Vera looked down at the hand on her sleeve as though it were a curiosity. Because I dislike being in pictures where someone else decides who is visible. She freed herself gently and walked away, leaving Rosamund staring after her, and me with the uncomfortable sense that the terrace had just become a far less innocent stage than the roses and sunshine pretended. When we returned to the drawing room, we found that Poirot had already begun his private interviews. The study door stood ajar, and within I could hear the low murmur of his voice, and Arthur Easton's higher, more flurried replies. Lady Beatrice sat in a straight-back chair near the window, outwardly composed, though her fingers tapped a silent rhythm on the armrest that betrayed a mind restless with control. The others had scattered in uneasy little groups as before, but now their waiting had the sharp edge of men and women who know they are being weighed. I went to Lady Beatrice at once, and, with a glance around to be sure no one was close enough to overhear, repeated to her what Vera Langford had told me. Her face changed scarcely at all. Only her eyes widened, then narrowed again in a manner that was almost imperceptible. But for a second, I saw naked alarm there. "You are certain Miss Langford said that?" she asked. "Quite certain." She believed Sir Leopold had some small object in his hand, given him by Miss Worthing, and that he pocketed it. Lady Beatrice drew a slow breath. "Then it is worse than I feared." "Worse?" I repeated. She checked herself sharply. "I mean only that it confirms the photograph was not a foolish accident. Thank you, Captain Hastings. You have done well to tell me." Then, as if to dismiss the subject by force of will, she added, "Monsieur Poirot will handle it." At that moment, the study door opened wider and Arthur Easton came out, looking as though he had just walked a mile into a cold wind. His face was damp, his collar slightly awry, and he avoided everyone's eyes with a persistent tenacity that, in another man, I should have called guilt. Poirot followed him, smoothing his moustache with a small air of detachment. He saw me, and his eyes flicked for a second to my face. I knew then that he had already guessed I had learned something on the terrace. He did not question me. He never questions in public when a private moment will serve him better. "Merci, monsieur," he said placidly to Arthur. "You have been most clear. Now, if you will permit me." I will speak with another. Mademoiselle Celia, perhaps." Celia started like a girl roused from a bad dream. She went with him at once, and I watched her slight figure disappear into the study with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Poirot's calmness has the odd effect of making even the innocent feel they must marshal themselves like soldiers for inspection. In the 10 minutes that followed, there was a curious, shifting quiet. Mrs. Vane fidgeted with her handkerchief. Commander Stokes prowled to the mantel and back again. Reverend Rudd sat as though waiting for a sentence. Philip Charters watched them all with lazy contempt. Rosamond stood by the door to the terrace, her shoulders stiff, her eyes restless. Vera Langford remained near one of the mirrors, looking at nothing in particular and yet missing nothing at all. It was perhaps because of that atmosphere, tight, dry, ready for a spark, that when the spark arrived, it seemed almost inevitable. A maid came in. She was a young woman with a face trained to expressionless service. But now the training was breaking down. Her cheeks were blotched, and she held herself as if afraid the floor might give way under her feet. "Beg pardon, my lady," she said to Lady Beatrice, and her voice shook in spite of her efforts. There's Inspector Croft has come again, and he says he must speak to you at once." Lady Beatrice rose slowly, her eyes hard. "Inspector Croft again. Very well. Tell him I will see him in the hall." The maid did not move. She swallowed. "If you please, my lady, he's brought another gentleman, from Henley, and... oh, my lady, it's about a body." The word cut through the room like a draft. "A body?" repeated Lady Beatrice. "Yes, my lady. Found by the boathouse. They say..." Her voice broke. "They say it's Miss Worthing." For one long second, nobody moved. Then Celia screamed from inside the study and ran out, her hands pressed to her mouth. Arthur made a strangled sound and sat down heavily, as though his legs had been struck away. Mrs. Vane burst into tears. Reverend Rudd closed his eyes, lips moving silently. Philip swore softly under his breath. Rosamond went very still, as if the news had turned her to stone. Only Vera Langford did not alter her posture at all. She merely looked at the maid with a kind of detached pity, as though she had expected this and was sorry for the girl who had to say it. Poirot had come out behind Celia. His face was expressionless, but I saw the quickening in his eyes. He stepped forward, not hurriedly, but with that odd air he has of moving at once into the exact center of a situation. "Calm yourselves," he said softly. "There is no use in panic. The maid has brought news. We will verify it. Captain Hastings, you will come with me. Madame, pardon. Lady Beatrice. Perhaps you also. The rest of you will remain here. I ask it." Rosamond found her voice. "No, I'm coming." Poirot looked at her. "Mademoiselle, this is not a spectacle." "It is my house, my family, and my friend," she said fiercely. "You can't shut me in a room like a child." Poirot considered her a beat. Then he nodded. "Very well. But you will do as I say. That is the bargain." She snatched up her shawl and followed us almost at a run. In the hall, Inspector Croft waited with another man whom I recognized at once as Dr. Nairn, a solid, anxious fellow with spectacles always sliding down his nose. Both men bowed stiffly, with that curious mixture of deference and irritation country officials often exhibit towards their betters. "Lady Beatrice," said Croft, "I'm sorry to trouble you again. We've had a development. I thought you ought to know immediately, and as Monsieur Poirot is here, well, it seemed only right to send for him." Poirot's voice was very mild. "You have found Miss Worthing, Inspector?" "We have," Croft said bluntly. "Down by the boathouse. It looks bad, sir. Very bad." Lady Beatrice's chin lifted. "Take us to her." We crossed the lawn in a small, grim party. The lake glittered innocently. A breeze shook the willows. Somewhere a dog barked, then was silenced. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the country persists in beauty at the very moments one least deserves it. The boathouse stood a little apart under trees, its timber sides weathered to gray. 2 constables were stationed there, caps in hand. Beyond them, on a patch of close-cropped grass, something lay covered by a sheet. Dr. Narn went first to it, knelt, and lifted a corner. He looked up at Croft and gave a short, grave nod. Croft turned to Lady Beatrice. "I'm afraid there's no doubt, my lady. It's Miss Worthing." Lady Beatrice did not sway, did not cry out. She only drew in her breath sharply through her nose, as though she had been struck. Rosamond made a small sound, half choke, half sob, and covered her face. Poirot walked a little forward. He did not bend at once. He stood very still, eyes on the covered form, as if paying a kind of respect not to the dead woman but to the fact of death itself. Then he said gently, "May I look, Inspector?" Croft hesitated, then stepped aside. Poirot lifted the sheet carefully. Miss Worthing lay on her back, her dark hair spread untidily, her face pale to the lips. There was no contortion of fear, rather a quiet blankness, as if surprise had chased everything else away at the last moment. Her hands were at her sides, one clenched, one open. On the open palm was a faint smear of something brownish red, and I saw at once how Poirot's eyes went to it. "Doctor?" he asked. Dr. Narn cleared his throat. "She's been dead perhaps 36 hours. There's bruising at the back of the head. She's been struck from behind. The blow killed her." "And dragged," Poirot murmured, glancing at the grass, at the faint furrows that led from the path. Croft nodded. "Looks like she was carried or pulled from the yew walk and left here. Not thrown in the lake, which is odd if you ask me. Almost as though whoever did it wanted her found." Poirot did not answer. He stooped now, not to the body, but to the ground near it. For a long minute he examined something I could not see. Then, with infinite delicacy, he picked up a tiny object between thumb and forefinger. Even at that distance I caught a gleam. Poirot held it to the light. It was not a ring, but a small metal clasp, curved, jointed, with a little star-shaped pattern on one end. A broken fastener of some sort. "The little thing that falls and is not noticed," he said quietly. Croft frowned. "What is it?" Poirot did not reply at once. He put the clasp into his handkerchief, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. Rosamond lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes were glazed, but her voice came out steady as a knife. "So she didn't run away," she said. "Someone made her vanish so they could kill in peace." Vera Langford's words on the terrace returned to me with a chill. Loyalties here are not to the dead. Poirot straightened. His face was calm, but I knew him well enough to hear the steel underneath. "Inspector," he said, "now we have certainly a murder. And when there is a murder, there is a murderer. You will not, I think, say now that a heart failed by chance." Croft looked uneasy. "No, sir. No chance about this. But it gives us a direction. If Miss Worthing killed Sir Leopold and then tried to flee, someone could have caught up with her." Poirot's eyes held him politely. "It is a direction, yes, but perhaps not the right one. We shall see." He replaced the sheet with care, like a man closing a book he intends to open again. Then he turned to Lady Beatrice. "Madame, I must trouble you once more. You will return to the house. You will ask all the others to remain together. No one is to leave Easton Lodge without permission, yours or mine. We are now all, I'm afraid, under the same roof with a killer." Lady Beatrice's mouth tightened, but she nodded. "As you say." Poirot looked down once more at the silent, composed face of Miss Worthing. "The killer hiding in the photograph," he murmured, so low I think only I heard him. "He has moved now outside the frame. That is sometimes where he makes his mistake." And with that we began to walk back across the lawn, with the serene lake at our side and, behind us, the boathouse holding its bitter proof. I felt the whole air of Easton Lodge subtly change as we approached it, like a room in which someone has just shut a door and turned the key. We re-entered the house by a side door near the terrace. Word of the discovery had preceded us with the uncanny speed that bad news travels in enclosed places. A hush had fallen over Easton Lodge that was not the earlier hush of constraint, but the deeper, stunned silence of a household touched by violence twice in as many days. We passed a maid in the corridor who shrank back as though we were contagious. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed softly, and I had the impression of people withdrawing into rooms not for privacy, but for fear. In the drawing room, the group had altered. Mrs. Vane sat with Celia's head on her shoulder, rocking her gently, both women weeping in that helpless, repetitious way grief has when it is still raw enough to be unbelieving. Reverend Rudd stood by the window, looking out at nothing, his hands clenched so tightly that the tendons showed pale under the skin. Commander Stokes had seated himself at last, legs planted apart, elbows on knees, staring at the carpet as if it might tell him what to do. Arthur Easton had retreated to a chair near the fireplace and seemed to have shrunk in it. Philip Charters was pacing slowly from one end of the room to the other, cigarette forgotten between his fingers. Rosamond went straight to her sister, putting an arm about her with a fierce protective tenderness. Vera Langford was the only one who was not comforting or pacing or staring. She stood exactly where I had last seen her, by the mirror, her expression grave but controlled. Yet there was, I thought, a faint tightening about her mouth that suggested not only sorrow but calculation, like a person taking in a new fact and setting it carefully into a pattern they already suspect. Poirot entered quietly, Ella-like in his composure, and for a moment the others did not even notice him. When they did, all eyes flew to his face with the hungry, frightened hope people have that a genius will say something that makes horror manageable. He did not. He merely bowed. Mesdames, Messieurs, I regret to confirm the sad news. Miss Worthing is dead. The doctor believes she was killed by a blow from behind sometime yesterday. That fact changes everything. I must ask you all now to help me in a different way. Philip barked a laugh that had no mirth in it. Different way? We've been helping you all day, unless you want us to draw lots for who's guilty. Poirot looked at him with a mild, almost pitying patience. Non, monsieur. I want you to tell me the truth. It is not always the same thing as helping. Philip colored slightly and threw his cigarette into the grate. Inspector Croft came in behind Poirot, removing his cap, looking already less sure of himself than he had at the boathouse. The weight of 2 deaths had settled on his shoulders like a sudden responsibility he did not much care for. Right, he said briskly, a little too briskly. You've all heard. We'll be making inquiries. No one is to leave the house. I've sent for more men. Doctor's doing his report. We'll want statements. Arthur Easton lifted his head, his careful manner returning like armor. Inspector, I presume you understand that we have Monsieur Poirot here at Lady Beatrice's request. We shall naturally cooperate. But the family's affairs... Croft began. Of course, Mr. Easton, but this is a police matter. Poirot interposed gently. Inspector, you will permit that I ask first a few questions. Afterwards, you shall have your statements. We do not work against each other, yes? We work together, but perhaps not in the same order. Croft hesitated, then nodded. I could see he was relieved to let Poirot take the front for the moment. Poirot turned to the room. First, one small but important thing. Yesterday, while we believed Miss Worthing had fled, all of you have spoken of her disappearance. Some of you were angry, some of you were worried, some of you were sure she was guilty. Now that she is dead, these feelings may change. I ask you each very simply, did you see Miss Worthing at any time after Sunday evening? There was a silence in which I could almost hear the beating of hearts. Reverend Rudd said low, "No." Mrs. Vane shook her head, unable to speak. Celia sobbed, "No, no, she was gone." Commander Stokes rumbled, "Not I." Philip paused, then said, "I didn't so much as pass her on the stairs." Vera Langford replied in the same precise tone as ever, "No." Poirot nodded, as if ticking off items on a mental ledger. Then he asked, "You say she was gone, yet she was in her room on Sunday night. The bed was slept in. How do you know this?" Lady Beatrice answered stiffly. "The sheets were turned back, the pillow used, there were traces. It was obvious." Poirot accepted that, then said quietly, "Obvious things are sometimes arranged to look obvious." Rosamond looked up sharply. "Do you mean she didn't sleep there?" "I mean only that I do not yet know. Now, another question for all. On Sunday afternoon, before dinner, Miss Worthing was seen by some of you. I will ask in turn. Mademoiselle Celia, you say you saw her at 4 o'clock in the corridor." Celia lifted her tear-streaked face. "Yes. She was coming from Aunt Beatrice's room with some papers. She smiled at me. I asked if she'd taken the letters to the village. She said she hadn't been yet." "In what mood was she?" Celia blinked. "Normal, I think. Maybe a little preoccupied. But she often was when there were letters." Poirot turned. "Monsieur Arthur, you said you spoke to her in the study at 5. Arthur swallowed. "Yes. She brought me some figures to sign. She was perfectly calm." "Do you recall what she wore?" He hesitated, frowning as if startled by the specificity. "A grey dress. She always wore grey." Poirot's eyes flicked to Rosamond. "And you, mademoiselle, did you see her after tea?" Rosamond shook her head. "Not after tea, but earlier, yes, in the yew walk. She asked me if I would come with her to the village on Monday morning. She said she wanted to finish something properly. I didn't ask what. She looked upset, but she wouldn't say why." Poirot's head tilted. "Upset? How? Angry? Afraid?" Rosamond thought. "Not angry, more steady, like someone who has decided something and is forcing herself not to flinch." Poirot murmured, "Merci." Then he lifted his eyes to Philip Charters. "Monsieur Philip, you are nephew of the deceased. When was the last time you spoke with Sir Leopold?" Philip's jaw worked. "Sunday after dinner. We argued about money, if you want it plain. I wanted him to advance something from the estate. He refused. We left it cold, but we weren't on knife edges. He was always a bit morale." Poirot nodded. "You will tell me later about this money. For now, a smaller point. On Saturday afternoon on the terrace, Miss Worthing gave to Sir Leopold a small, bright object. You were there. Did you see this?" Philip stared. No. I didn't see anything past. I wasn't watching the pair of them. Why do you say she did?" Poirot gestured softly toward Vera. "Mademoiselle Langford saw it." Philip's eyes went to Vera, narrowing. "Well," he said slowly, "if she did, that's news to me. But Abigail had plenty to talk to Uncle about. She used to carry files about, didn't she? Maybe it was a key. Maybe it was a seal. God knows." Poirot did not correct him. He let the uncertainty hang, a silk thread in the air. He turned to Lady Beatrice again. "Madame, you did not wish to speak earlier about the family matters for which Sir Leopold came. But now there are 2 deaths. Silence becomes dangerous. I must ask you to tell me what he came to do." Lady Beatrice's nostrils flared. For an instant I thought she would refuse. Then, perhaps under the weight of Croft's stare and the shaken faces around her, she yielded. "He came," she said sharply, "to discuss my late husband's will." Arthur stiffened. "Beatrice." "Hush, Arthur." She faced Poirot squarely. "My husband left Eastern Lodge to me for my lifetime, with remainder to Arthur's elder daughter, Celia. The arrangement was made to keep the estate intact, for Arthur is not a man for burdens. Sir Leopold believed there was a legal weakness in the wording. He wished to correct it by codicil while we still could. That is all. Philip let out a soft, incredulous whistle. So Celia gets the lot? That's a cozy plan. Rosamond glared at him. It was Uncle Henry's wish. And yours, I'm sure, Philip retorted. Celia lifted her head, white-faced. I never asked for anything. I didn't even know until last week. Poirot's voice cut in gently. Last week? So, madame, Sir Leopold had already told you of this weakness. Yes, Lady Beatrice said. He wrote to me. He said he must see me at once. He arrived Saturday morning. And Miss Worthing knew of this business. Lady Beatrice's eyes flickered. She typed the letter. She knew he was coming. She would have heard something, perhaps. But I do not discuss family affairs with secretaries. Poirot gave a tiny bow. Ah, but secretaries often hear without intending to, especially when their employer is distressed. There was a silence. The air felt closer, as though the room's high ceiling had lowered itself to listen. Poirot went on softly. So, a will to be altered, an estate to be secured, a nephew who wants money, a daughter who inherits, a sister who protests innocence, a household in tension, and in the middle, a secretary who passes a small object to the solicitor and then is killed. Commander Stokes exploded. This all sounds like motive to me. You're implying we all wanted the old boy dead. Poirot turned to him with polite surprise. But naturally, monsieur, in murder, motive is the air we breathe. Without it, we suffocate. I do not yet say who wanted him dead. I say only that many could. And that is why we must look not at the motives first, but at the contradictions. Vera Langford spoke suddenly, still calm. Monsieur Poirot, if you're speaking of contradictions, there is one already. Lady Beatrice says Sir Leopold drank only 1 glass of port on Sunday, yet there was a broken whiskey glass by his chair. All heads turned. Lady Beatrice's eyes widened a fraction. The whiskey glass, she repeated slowly. I did not mention whiskey. Sir Leopold did not drink whiskey here. Inspector Croft said awkwardly. There was a glass, my lady. We found it by the rug. It had a smell of spirits. Poirot's gaze sharpened to a needlepoint. You did not drink whiskey with him, Monsieur Arthur. Arthur's face reddened violently. No, we had port. I don't touch whiskey. And you, Commander? Stokes shook his head. Never with him. Philip frowned. He sometimes took a nip late, but I wasn't with him. Poirot let the moment settle. Then he said very quietly, So the whiskey glass is a stranger in this room, like a guest who was not invited. We shall find who brought him. The line of thought was clear as a bell to me now. If Sir Leopold was found with a whiskey glass when no one admits to whiskey, then someone lies, or something was staged. And staged evidence is always made by a mind that thinks itself clever. Poirot clasped his hands, looking from one face to another, and his voice became almost kindly. Mesdames, Messieurs, I will say this. No one leaves. No one destroys anything. Tonight, you will sleep with your doors bolted if you choose, but you will not fear too much. The killer has acted twice. He is not an animal that strikes without thinking. He's a person with a plan, perhaps already fraying. I will speak to each of you again, and I will visit places in this house you have not thought important. The answer is here, so it hides in your habits, your tempers, your little vanities. Yes, even in your kindnesses. He turned slightly toward me, and I saw in his eye the signal we always share. There is more, but not yet. Captain Hastings and I will now walk a little through the house, he said aloud. Inspector Croft, perhaps you will arrange that no one goes to the village or to the station. Lady Beatrice, I thank you. The rest of you, be calm. We are nearing what we seek. As we left the room, I felt behind us the slow simmer of suspicion beginning to rise. And somewhere in that simmer, I knew the killer would be listening, trying already to decide what his next move must be. That evening, at Poirot's request, the family dined together in a silence so thick that even the clink of cutlery seemed an indecency. I watched faces rather than plates. Grief had settled on Celia like a physical weight. She ate little, her eyes reddened, her hands trembling when she lifted her glass. Rosamond moved in little bursts of fierce tenderness, now coaxing her sister to swallow a mouthful, now turning on Philip with a glare that could have scorched wood. Lady Beatrice sat rigid, every line of her body proclaiming that order must be maintained, even if the world were on fire. Arthur Easton ate carefully, as though etiquette were a raft, and he clung to it with both hands. Commander Stokes drank more than was wise. Reverend Rudd prayed with his eyes open. Vera Langford remained composed, almost too composed, her pale gaze traveling from one face to another as though she were memorizing the scene. Philip Charters alone seemed to make an effort at ease. He smiled, he offered a cigarette case, he made a light remark about the chef's excellent sauce. But his fingers drummed a restlessness on the tablecloth between courses, and I saw how often his glance slid toward the terrace windows, like a man keeping an eye on an exit. After dinner, Poirot asked that all of us gather in the library. The servants withdrew at once. Inspector Croft took a chair by the door with the air of a man who had been told to watch children in a nursery, but suspected the children might be armed. Poirot stood before the hearth, immaculate as ever, though his eyes were tired. He waited until everyone had settled. Then he spoke gently. "Mesdames, Messieurs, I will not prolong your misery. We are here because there is no longer any doubt. Sir Leopold Charters was murdered. Miss Worthing was murdered. The two crimes are linked by the photograph and by something very small that passed from the one to the other. I will explain. But first, I ask you to listen to the order of facts. Without order, there is no truth." He picked up the photograph from the table and held it so that the light fell upon it. On Saturday afternoon this was taken. There were 13 people on the terrace, yet only 12 appear. Someone altered the negative before it was printed. The purpose was not art, but misdirection. When Miss Worthing vanished, you were meant to say, "She fled because she is guilty." In other words, the photograph was prepared in advance, as a mask to be put on later. Arthur Easton made a helpless gesture. But why prepare it in advance? How could anyone know she would vanish? Poirot turned his head. "Ah, monsieur, that is precisely the point. The person who altered the photograph did know, because he intended she would vanish, one way or another." A low sound escaped Celia. Rosamond's hand tightened around her sister's. Poirot went on quietly. "Who among you could alter such a picture? There is a dark room in the laundry wing. Mademoiselle Celia uses it, yes. But another here also knows the dark room very well. A gentleman who told us himself that at Cambridge he had friends skilled in such work, that scratching a negative is not witchcraft." His eyes rested on Philip Charters. Philip's smile did not leave his face, but it stiffened. "You can't mean—" "Patience, monsieur. We proceed." Poirot set the photograph down and took from his pocket the tiny metal clasp, wrapped in his handkerchief. He placed it on the table. Under the lamp, it gleamed faintly. "This was found beside Miss Worthing's body. It is the broken clasp of a cufflink, small, curved, with a little star design at the end. I show it to you now because I have already looked at all your cuffs. Most of you wear plain buttons, but one man here wears star cufflinks. He wore them on Saturday. One of them is missing today." I saw Commander Stokes' head jerk. Vera's eyes widened a fraction. Lady Beatrice drew in breath through her nose, very sharp. Philip stared at the clasp as though it had become a snake. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Star cufflinks are common enough." Poirot nodded politely. "Indeed. That is why I checked the jeweler in Henley this afternoon. The star pattern is not common in the way you suggest. It is a particular design sold 3 years ago by Lemaire of Bond Street, and Lemaire keeps careful records. The gentleman who bought that set did so on his uncle's account. The name on the invoice is Philip Charters. There was a sound in the room like a collective inhalation. Philip's face went a shade lighter. Poirot's voice was calm, almost kind. On Saturday, Miss Worthing stood here. He gestured toward the terrace windows, close to Sir Leopold. She passed him a small, bright object. Mademoiselle Vera saw it, she told Captain Hastings. What was it? It was this cufflink, monsieur. Philip gave a short laugh that cracked. Why would she pass, sir? Leopold, my cufflink? Because she took it from you, said Poirot simply. In the study on Saturday morning, while Sir Leopold was reading the papers about the Eastern estate, you came in. You were anxious about money. You went through the blue folder on the table, perhaps hoping to find a codicil, perhaps hoping to learn if Sir Leopold meant to advance you anything. Miss Worthing surprised you. There was a scuffle, only a small one. Your cufflink was torn from your sleeve. She picked it up. Arthur stammered. But, Philip, did you go into Sir Leopold's papers? Philip snapped. Of course I did. He was my uncle. I had business. That doesn't make me a murderer. No, Poirot agreed. Not by itself, but Miss Worthing was a conscientious woman. She did not keep the cufflink to punish you. She kept it because it was proof. Proof that you had been where you denied being, and in papers you had no right to touch. Rosamond whispered, she was trying to protect us. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. On Saturday afternoon, she gave the cufflink to Sir Leopold privately. I believe she said something like, he is meddling, watch him. Sir Leopold pocketed it, intending to speak to you later. But you saw the exchange. You saw him holding the cufflink when Celia raised the camera. You understood then that Miss Worthing had placed a stone in your path. Philip's breathing was quick now. His eyes darted, not to faces, but to doors and windows. Poirot continued. That evening you could not take it from Sir Leopold without raising suspicion, so you waited. On Sunday after dinner, you asked him for money. He refused. You knew he meant to confront you about the papers and the cufflink. He was not a man who would be blackmailed or hurried. He would have told Lady Beatrice. He would have made certain the codicil was signed. That would finish your hopes. Philip burst out, What hopes? The Eastern estate isn't even mine. Poirot's gaze never wavered. Your hopes were not for Eastern Lodge. They were for Sir Leopold's goodwill. You are deeply in debt, monsieur. Gambling, I think. Your uncle had already paid your creditors twice. This time he meant to stop. Philip's lips parted. The color drained away. And so, Poirot said softly, you went down very early on Monday morning with a tray. Not breakfast, no. A glass of whiskey. Sir Leopold did not drink whiskey, you see. That is why none of the household admitted to it. But you do drink whiskey. You poured it, and in it you dissolved a little of a drug. One that can stop a weak heart abruptly. The doctor called it a heart failure because you made it look so. You spoke to him quietly. You handed him the glass. Your uncle drank. He rose, perhaps to reach for the bell, and fell, striking his head. You placed the poker where it would suggest an accident. Then you left the broken glass by the chair like a careless afterthought. The police found it, and you hoped their minds would be satisfied with the obvious. Reverend Rudd's hands covered his mouth. Mrs. Vane began to weep again, but now with horror rather than sorrow. Poirot lifted a hand. Afterwards, Miss Worthing became dangerous to you in a new way. She had given Sir Leopold the cufflink. If he was dead and you could recover it, you might still keep suspicion away. But she had also seen you in the study, and perhaps she had guessed your desperation. She meant to go to the village on Monday to finish something properly. Likely she meant to post a letter to Lady Beatrice, or to the police, or to a lawyer. You could not allow it. Rosamond said through clenched teeth, so he killed her. Poirot nodded once. In the yew walk. You met her there, Monsieur Philippe. You asked for the cufflink. She refused. Perhaps she said she would give it to Lady Beatrice herself. You struck her from behind with something heavy. A boat hook, perhaps, taken from the boathouse. She fell. In the struggle, your cufflink clasp broke and dropped beside her. You dragged her body to the boathouse lawn and left it where it would be found quickly, because by then you had already prepared the photograph. You wanted the household to believe she had run away after killing Sir Leopold. You wanted her to be the culprit in absentia. Philip's voice came out hoarse. You can't prove any of that. Poirot looked at him almost sadly. We can. There will be traces of the drug in Sir Leopold's glass and in his body. Inspector Croft will see to that. Your fingerprints will be on the decanter you used in the pantry. And there is one more thing. He turned gently to Celia. Mademoiselle, this afternoon when I asked to see your dark room, you were brave enough to show me. On the shelf, I found a small bottle of fixer with a fresh smear of dark gelatine on the lip and a scratched needle beside it. And in the waste bin, I found the torn corner of a negative where a figure had been laboriously scraped away. You were shocked because you did not put it there. You told me you had lent the darkroom key on Sunday night. Celia whispered. To Philippe. He said he wanted a print of the terrace photograph for his scrapbook. I didn't think... No, Poirot said softly. You did not think because you are honest. That is why wickedness uses honesty as a coat. Philip stared at the floor. Then his head lifted sharply, and for a flash the old arrogant charm sprang up, fierce and cornered. All right, he said. All right, suppose I did take the negative. Suppose I did mean to frame her. She had no right to meddle. She was a secretary. She was nothing. My uncle was ruining me. He had no right to sit in judgment on my life. He was old, pompous, and he never understood. Ah, Poirot interrupted gently. Now you speak not of facts, but of yourself. That is good. Because the truth is not only what happened, it is why you allowed yourself to do it. Philip's shoulders sagged. The anger went out of him like air from a punctured tire. I didn't mean to kill her, he whispered. Not Abigail. She wouldn't give it back. She just looked at me as if I was a child having a tantrum. I swung. She fell. She didn't even cry out. Rosamond made a sound like a wounded animal and sprang forward, but Commander Stokes caught her from behind, holding her hard. Inspector Croft rose, face pale but determined. Philip Charters, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Philip did not resist. He looked around the room once, as though searching for a face that might forgive him, and found none. Then he let Croft take his arm. As the door shut behind them, a kind of collapse moved through the room. Mrs. Vane sobbed openly. Arthur buried his face in his hands. Celia leaned into Rosamond's trembling embrace. Lady Beatrice stood perfectly still, and only when I saw her swallow did I understand what it cost her to remain upright. Poirot went to her quietly. Madame, he said, I regret the scandal, but I do not regret the truth. It is the only justice we can give the dead. Her voice, when it came, was very low. Abigail tried to do right. Yes, said Poirot simply. She was brave in a quiet way. That is why she died, but also why she saved you. Had she not taken that cufflink, had she not warned Sir Leopold, you might never have seen the danger until it was too late. Rosamond whispered, and now she's gone because of us. Poirot looked at her, gentle and firm. Not because of you, mademoiselle. Because of the one who chose evil. Do not take his guilt into your heart. It is not yours to carry. There was a long silence. Then Poirot turned to me, and in his eyes was that weary, grave compassion which, for all his sharp intellect, is perhaps his most human trait. Come, Hastings, we have done what we came to do. The little grey cells, they do their duty. But the heart, it is never so neat. We left them there in the library, under the solemn gaze of books that had seen generations of higher hopes and lower deeds. Outside, the night had settled cool and clear. The lake was a sheet of black glass. Somewhere a swan called once, lonely and surprised. As we walked back toward our rooms, Poirot paused by the terrace door and glanced out at the spot where the photograph had been taken. "You see," he murmured, "how a killer hides in a photograph. He thinks if he can erase a person from the paper, he can erase the person from truth. But truth is not so easily scratched away. It remains in the reactions, in the contradictions, in the tiny broken clasp that falls in the grass." He adjusted his tie with automatic precision, as though restoring a small order to a disordered world. "And remember this, mon ami. When people say a thing is only a photograph, they forget. A photograph holds not only faces, but choices. And it is always the choices that betray us in the end."